The operation is covering 3 provinces. It's KZN, Free State, and Gauteng. And including that, there are also 5 companies that are going to be charged as well.
So the asset forfeiture has to appoint a curator who is then going to manage that process. And the curator and nobody else has an access to that property except the asset forfeiture unit. And none of the 7 accused can do anything to that property. So part of the immovable property, like cars, any other household furniture, has to be taken away.
The arrest this week of some figures who appeared at the Zondo Commission has brought hope to corruption-weary South Africans who have been waiting to see if anybody is held to account for the countless acts of fraud and corruption across the government. Our question this evening is the NPA finally acting on those involved in corruption? You may join the conversation on social media using our various platforms and using the hashtag SABC Unfiltered. So hashtag SABC Unfiltered, where you can send some of those questions as well as those comments. Our guest this evening is the head of the Investigating Directorate in the Office of the NPA. That's the National Director of Public Prosecutions. We also have Advocate Paul Hoffman, who will be joining us a bit later on, as well as the head of Projects for Accountability now. And we'll be joined by Professor Mcebisi Dlejane just a bit later on. Right now, let's introduce Advocate Herman Krunier, who is heading that ID at the Office of the NPA. Good afternoon, or rather good evening, Advocate, and welcome to Unfiltered.
Good evening, Aldrin, and good evening to your viewers.
Just over a year now since the establishment of the ID, are you satisfied with the work that you've been able to do so far?
I think being satisfied would be a little, unambitious, I should say, because I would have hoped that we would have been much further by now, but various constraints mean that we are where we are. But I'm certainly confident that you will see more and more visible the work that we've been doing in the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of those issues that have been, being stumbling blocks?
So I think that, when the Investigating Directorate was proclaimed last year in March, the President, I think, was hoping that given the revelations coming out of the commissions of inquiry, at that point it was the Zondo Commission, it was also the Nugent Commission, which dealt with SARS, and then the PIC Commission was also underway. And, the revelations coming out of these commissions was painting a very grim picture of corruption in South Africa. And law enforcement collectively seemed to be completely paralyzed in the face of overwhelming revelations of corruption. So the idea was to find a mechanism, an extraordinary mechanism, which is what the Investigating Directorate is. It's not a run-of-the-mill law enforcement mechanism. Mm-hmm. What the Investigating Directorate is it combines investigation and prosecution and co-locates those two capabilities in one space and gets us to prioritize and focus our attention on the particular problem. And the problem the President gave us to address is high-level, serious, complex corruption. Mm-hmm. And so when we started, there wasn't really a capability in the Office of the National Director to do this work. So we had to basically build that capacity from scratch. Mm-hmm. And you'll know that the Scorpions were last removed from the Office of the National Director, or removed from the NPA completely. Yeah. So there hasn't been in the NPA investigative capacity for over 10 years now. So we've had to work with our partners in law enforcement, SABC, DPCI, to try and access skilled investigators. And the context, all of these entities have they're very constrained resource-wise. So that's been the major challenge. Skill, capacity, and capability to do the work that we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Then explain to us then the collaboration with the State Capture Commission of Inquiry and some of the skilled professionals who work there and how they're assisting the Directorate.
So initially, the proclamation that governs the State Capture Commission did not allow for members of the commission to share the information that they'd been gathering with anyone else until the evidence has been presented in public, or if the chair of the commission authorizes the release of a report. But with, as you know by now, with the amendment to the regulation a month ago, or a month and a half ago, the amendment allowed for two things. It allowed us to access information, but far more importantly, it allowed us access to personnel who had been working at the commission for over 2 years, who either had completed their work and were now free to be employed by us. Before the amendment, those investigators could not share with us what they had uncovered and what they understood of the landscape of state capture and corruption.
How would they then have assisted in the investigation against former ANC MP Vincent Smith?
So that investigation actually we were able to complete before having access to any of the work done at the commission. So actually we had done that investigation independent of the work done at the Zondo Commission. But obviously we were watching the testimony and we got a sense of where things were going. But our investigations, as will be seen from the charge sheet and from the docket that we disclosed to the defense, that much of the work had been done independently of the commission. But going forward, we do anticipate that we've already employed one investigator who worked on the Bosasa investigation and is now working with the ID. So that he will influence and inform our matters going forward.
Sure. So when you had the interview with the Sunday Times last month, what you've indicated was that a high-profile person would be arrested by the end of September. Is that person Vincent Smith?
I'm not sure that I intimated that a high-profile person will be arrested. What I had indicated in the Sunday Times interview is that we've divided our work into 3 focus areas. We have the security sector focus area, the state-owned enterprises, and high-level public and private sector corruption. And in each of those, we've identified priority matters. And looking at our timelines for where we would be with particular outcomes, I anticipated that we would be in a position to make significant arrests by the end of September. And so somehow that metamorphosized into a deadline that hung over my head and came to haunt me every day of September. But, you know, yeah, there will be more arrests coming out, because that's what we've been working on for the last year and a half, is to try and get these matters court ready and to enroll them and bring people to account for the revelations that people have been witnessing at these commissions for the last year.
So if we understand then what you said to the Sunday Times, does this now mean that the significant arrest that would be taking place has now been postponed?
All I'm saying is that there have been arrests and there will continue to be arrests of serious high-profile players who we believe ought to be held, or at least that the evidence suggests ought to be held accountable in court. So yeah, there have been arrests and there will continue to be. Our mandate is specifically high-profile, complex corruption. So presumably all the arrests that emanate from the directorate should involve a component of at the highest level. You know,
Do those individuals, or just with what you can share at the moment, Can you tell us whether those individuals are former members of the executive?
So, as I keep saying, the public protector's report that resulted in the establishment of the Zondo Commission, that report implicated senior politicians, and it implicated a whole host of people in what is believed to be capture of the state.
Yeah.
So the investigating directorate was set up to focus on those people. And when I said earlier, when the president established the directorate, what tends to happen in law enforcement is someone goes to the police station, they open a docket, and they say, I was wronged in this way or in that way, please investigate. And the police will look at that statement and look at verifying the allegations made in that statement. And there was a recognition that if you want to address people who were responsible at the highest level for the level and scale of corruption that we saw or have been seeing in this country, you need to make sure that you have apply a different methodology. And you can't just rely on the opening of a docket and the sort of linear investigation there. That you have to step back and build a case that takes you to those who orchestrated and those who benefited. And they are not necessarily the people who are easily identified, with charges that go to the police station.
Okay, so we're going to go to a quick ad break. When we come back, we continue our conversation with the ID head that is Advocate Cronje. And welcome back to Unfiltered as we focus on the work that has been done by the Investigating Directorate, which is in the office of the NPA. Let's just look at some of the tweets that you sent through or using the hashtag SABC Unfiltered. Okay, Nosipo says that why is bail not opposed by the state in corruption cases? The cases take forever to get concluded. Meanwhile, the thieves continue to enjoy their ill-gotten gains. And Siyabonga says, what's happening with the accounting error of Steinhoff? Is the NPA doing something about it? Advocate Cronje, let's start off with that particular question. Is the directorate investigating Steinhoff? Okay, we seem to have lost the advocate. So as soon as we get her back, we'll have that conversation about the work that's being done by the directorate and specifically investigations relating to private-owned companies, including the likes of Steinhoff. But then when we look at what's happened with the VBS scandal as well, you need to ask the question about what it is that the likes of KPMG should have been doing, which they didn't do. And should there be any investigation in relation to the work that's being done the work that had been done by KPMG in also facilitating what some may call state capture or even the looting of the VBS Bank. And then on the other end, you have some companies that have done some work with Eskom, and there are allegations of corruption there as well. And one of those companies that have been pointed is ABB, which is a Swiss-owned company. But then on the other hand, you have Siemens, which is also one of the contractors with Eskom. So, okay, understand that we have the advocate back. Okay, Advocate, the question that we had early on from Twitter is there any investigation in relation to the accounting error in the Steinhoff saga?
There is an investigation. It's just not an investigation being dealt with by the directorate because the directorate's mandate is corruption. And the allegations in Steinhoff are fraud and theft, as far as I understand, and just commercial crime. So it is a matter being dealt with by the Hawks and the NPA, but not by the directorate.
Is there a distinction between fraud and corruption? Yes,
but there are also similarities, and so there is an overlap. And but for the commercial crime unit, the specialized commercial crimes unit deals with corporate fraud and corruption, which is an area of specialization, just like corruption is an area of specialization. So it doesn't mean that it's not getting serious attention. It just means it's not getting serious attention by the directorate that I'm leading.
Okay. Why would the directorate not investigate such a matter when the directorate is able to investigate the company that was owned by Vincent Smith?
We investigate companies. It's not that we don't investigate companies. What we are not focusing on is commercial crime. So we focus on matters that have a component of corruption, which is corruption involves undermining the public interest by diverting funds for private gain. What you have in a matter like Steinhoff is basically theft and fraud, amongst private citizens. It's not about betraying the public trust and diverting public funds for private purposes. So that's really essentially the distinction.
Yeah. Is it really the case when the PIC has also lost money in the Steinhoff matter?
The PIC has also lost money in the Steinhoff matter. If it did so through corruption, then it would be something we would be looking into. It's not that the Steinhoff matter is not a serious matter and it's not getting serious attention in the NPA. It's just not being dealt with by my directorate. And there are other very serious matters that are being addressed by the Specialized Commercial Crimes Unit. So it's not a competition about which is more serious. They are both, the corruption cases that we're dealing with and the serious commercial crimes cases that are being dealt with by the Specialized Commercial Crimes Unit in the NPA, they're all equally serious. Yeah. They're just being dealt with by different capabilities.
Okay. Then when it comes to companies such as KPMG, for instance, who are supposed to, through their audits, work with the state to ensure that there is no fraud and corruption, is there any investigation in relation to KPMG and the work that KPMG has done in also subverting funds?
In general, or any particular matter?
For instance, if you look at the VBS saga, for instance, and we can also take it further and speak about the what's it called, the rogue unit matter, for instance.
So from the VBS matter, there are certainly allegations that the oversight function of the auditors was seriously compromised. Yeah. And so I imagine that that matter is being investigated. And if there is a basis to prefer criminal charges, then that certainly will happen. But it's not something that I have particular insight into.
Okay, we're going to go to a quick ad break then, Advocate. When we come back, we'll look at specific matters that your office is currently dealing with. That conversation just after this. And welcome back to Unfiltered. I'm in conversation this evening with the ID head, that is Advocate Herman Cronje, who joins us via Skype. Advocate, let's then start with the extradition of the Guptas. Have you now received assistance around the extradition of the Guptas?
So we have made, I'm not sure about the request for assistance around the extradition of the Guptas, but we've made mutual legal assistance requests to our counterparts in the EU, as well as India, China, a whole host of countries, to assist with two things, with gathering evidence about where the proceeds of the crimes, of the corruption offences have ended up. And we've had varying degrees of success. And in fact, we're having another high-level meeting tomorrow to discuss why the progress is so slow and how we can expedite getting assistance, particularly from the UAE.
Is the assistance that you need to extradite them, or is it just assistance that you need to find out where the proceeds are?
It's both, but obviously, if we need assistance with getting evidence, and once we have the evidence, the other steps should follow quite smoothly. But if we're struggling with getting assistance with gathering evidence, it's going to be that much harder to get assistance with extradition.
Yep. At the moment, is there any investigation just in relation to the Gupta brothers? Is there a case against the Gupta brothers?
Is there currently a criminal case against the Gupta brothers? There is not. The Estina Dairy case involved one of the Gupta brothers, but that case was withdrawn, and that case is now sitting with the directorate, and we are looking at finalizing the investigation in that matter to be able to re-enroll it.
Okay. Can you, Advocate, just quickly touch on the Richard Mdluli saga as well? This is in relation to the slush fund. It's been a matter that has been ongoing now. Are you now ready to go to trial?
We have, in fact, enrolled the matter. So it's taken years to overcome the issue of declassification of confidential material, but that's now been resolved. And so the Mdluli matter has been brought before court again. And I just want to say, one of your questions on Twitter was, why have we not closed bail? And, because these investigations tend to take a very long time. In the matters that we've brought before court, particularly the Pandey matter, for example, that is a 10-year-old matter. The same with Mdluli. So these are matters where the suspects have been aware of the investigations against them and have in some respects cooperated. And so, bail is not about whether or not you're guilty. Bail is about whether you're going to stand your trial, whether you're going to be available. And in these cases, the assessments that we've made is that the accused persons, we have enough of control over them and their movement to ensure that they do stand trial when the criminal matters are called. But I do want to add that we are very conscious of the length of time it takes to bring any of these matters before court. And so in our preparation, we have looked very closely at tightening up on some of those loopholes. And so we stand very ready to oppose any of these attempts to bring sort of interlocutory applications, which has been the basic method of prolonging trial.
Yep. Okay, Advocate, we need to go to another break. We have to say goodbye to our SABC 3 viewers. The conversation, though, will continue on the SABC News channel, that is 404, and we will be joined by political analyst Professor Mcebisi Ndlejana as well as Advocate Paul Hoffman. And welcome back to Unfiltered. As we've been indicating, we're in conversation this evening with the head of the Investigating Directorate at the NPA, that is Advocate Hermione Cronje. We'll now be joined by Paul Hoffman. Advocate Paul Hoffman will be joining us for this conversation, and he is from Accountability Now. Let's first go back to Advocate Cronje. Advocate Cronje, one of the issues that the NPA has been dealing with, and I don't know whether you'll be able to express yourself on it, is the issue around funding. And there has been this conversation that has been going on about the decision to accept funding from the Germans. How do you then make sure that there is no conflict when it comes to matters that relate to companies that are from Germany? And with this matter, I ask specifically on the matter of SAP as well as the matter of Siemens.
Question to me?
Yes, Advocate.
Sorry, I only caught the tail end of the question, but am I correct in understanding that you're asking if the NPA is accepting funds from Germany, how will that impact on our prosecution of German companies?
Yeah.
So, I'm not even privy to the funding arrangements or donations made or contributions made by any company, but the prosecution policy dictates that decisions about who to prosecute and on what charges to prosecute are the decisions of the prosecutor based on the evidence available. So it would be improper for me or anyone in the investigating directorate to base a decision to prosecute on the basis of who paid us what money. That would be improper influence, and it would not be prosecuting without fear, favor, or prejudice. So yeah, it's just not a factor that can and should impact, and if it does, we should be held accountable for that.
Mm-hmm. But how do you prevent that? Because even the perception of a conflict could arise. In a matter, for instance, let's speak about the matter around SAP. Is the directorate currently investigating SAP?
So, we've taken a policy decision to not confirm who it is we are investigating or not investigating. When charges are preferred, it will obviously become public knowledge who a case has been brought against. So I would prefer not to confirm or deny, but it's certainly no secret that there are many multinationals that have been fingered at the Zondo Commission in corruption. And so certainly we have a responsibility to investigate those claims, and that is part of what we've been doing.
Okay. Can you confirm then whether you are investigating SAP?
I think I just said I'm not going to do that. But I can confirm that we are investigating the allegations arising at the Zondo Commission in relation to multinationals. And I've also said that, high-level corruption is usually involving not only high-level politicians, but also multinationals in the private sector. So it would be incongruous for us to look at local politicians and members of the executive and not look at executives in multinationals that have been party to corruption.
Okay. Advocate Paul Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us this evening as well. Let's hear your take on what Advocate Cronje has just said.
Yes, I don't think that there is a conflict of interest because the prosecutor is far removed from the realm of international cooperation in training and funding the National Prosecuting Authority as such. It's going to make no difference in the life of a prosecutor who is working on a docket against, let's say, for example, SAP or Siemens, the example you raise, because that prosecutor has been brought up to act without fear of the powerful, favor to the friend, or prejudice. That's what that phrase means. They are independent. They are meant to be independent. If they do not act, they're in danger of losing jobs. So it's a problem as far as.
Okay, we seem to have a problem there. Let's try to go to Professor Ndlejane. Professor Ndlejane, are you there? Just a quick... Okay, we understand that he's not there. Is he there now? Okay, let's hear Professor Ndlejane, just your take around this conversation around how do you manage a perceived conflict of interest?
Well, it becomes a worry if there are indications of bias. I don't think the mere fact that they would get money from the Germans might necessarily need to lead to perceptions of bias. What they need to do, obviously, all the time, and I think they have been getting money, well, I'm not sure actually, but they have been getting money, okay. So when you do that and you are investigating, the important thing is always to act in a way that doesn't create suspicion. And so it doesn't follow that because they get money, necessarily, there will be perception of bias. The perceptions of bias will be created by their own actions, indicating bias. So we shouldn't necessarily create worries where there are none.
I don't agree. I don't agree that there are no worries, Prof, because, for instance, some of the cases that are being investigated right now are cases where it was said to be it was a donation to Sban, when in actual fact it's actually a kickback. So how do you understand a foreign government donating money to an organization that is at the core of holding the corrupt accountable?
Well, Thuli Madonsela used to get donations. And you've just confirmed that they do get donations.
Yeah.
And I don't think there would be necessarily something wrong with that. And by the way, the German government prides itself in fighting corruption.
Yes.
I don't think that the Germans would necessarily give money to the NPA, expecting that the NPA would not prosecute German companies that are embroiled in corruption.
Mm-hmm.
So my point is that the thought itself, it's not entirely far-fetched, Adrian.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I'm saying it doesn't follow, therefore, that when there is a donation, necessarily there will be a perception of bias.
Mm-hmm.
Only if they act in ways that you will certainly pick up, Adrian. For instance, there might be allegations against German companies, and for some reason they are not being pursued by the NPA. Then you'll have reason to worry. Then that on its own is a trigger of suspicion.
Okay, let's go back to Advocate Cronje. Advocate Cronje, one of the big issues that Shamila Batoy also dealt with when she moved into the NPA was the issue around political interference. With the work that you're currently doing, do you feel at all that you are, that you are insulated from that political interference, considering the high-profile people that you're also investigating?
So certainly, I haven't felt or experienced political interference, but that doesn't mean it isn't a reality when people are dealing with corruption cases, and something that we should anticipate and actually expect to face. The more we act against people in positions of power. So while there haven't been any concrete experience of interference, we are certainly in our planning and our risk management have it on our radar as an issue.
Mm-hmm. And how do you prevent it?
I'm not sure that we can prevent it, but certainly, even in the discussion we were just having about foreign funding,
yeah.
For me, transparency is key. So whenever a donation is made to the NPA has to declare that donation in its financial statement. So any member of the public can look at the NPA's financial statements and assess where has it had contributions, where has it had donations. Right now, we are in discussions, for example, with Business Against Crime about how we can be assisted to do the kind of prosecutions you were asking me about earlier, of the Steinhoffs and other corporates. And so whatever donation we get has to be declared in the policy framework of the government. And if, as Professor Ntletshiana says, you compare our actions and you look at our donations and you assess for yourself, is there a problem? And I think Professor Hoffman and other NGOs have demonstrated that if there's transparency, they are able to hold us to account in court for actions that they believe are improper.
Yeah, so I'm asking this question also on the basis of some of the investigations that you are conducting. And even if you look, for instance, at the Richard Mdluli matter and the slush fund matter, would you say that that matter has been void of any external influence? Now speaking about political influence, to influence the prosecutors to not go ahead with the prosecution, to influence senior officials to not declassify the information that has now been declassified?
Look, there have been many judgments that have commented on the conduct of that particular prosecution and have raised concerns about interference in that matter. And so those issues are certainly issues that we have been dealing with. But the same goes with the Pandey prosecution. That prosecution has been outstanding for years. And, all sorts of questions are asked about why it took the NPA so long to begin to address these prosecutions. What we're trying to do is to certainly expedite those cases that have been long outstanding. That's been the biggest part of our work in the last year and a half is to bring before court cases that ought to have been before court some time ago. And, those are particularly difficult cases because they are not investigations that we have conducted. We have to clean up, mistakes that were made. We have to, deal with historical problems.
Yeah.
So that's why those ones have been particularly challenging. And so there certainly has been interference in the past. There are enough judgments and enough evidence at the Zondo Commission to give you a clear indication of that.
Yeah.
And there will probably be more as we go forward. I mean, that's international experience. When you deal with powerful people, they use whatever they have at their disposal to make life difficult for you.
Okay, so when we come back, we're going to have a conversation about investigations against those powerful people, just after this. Okay, Advocate Paul Hoffman, thank you so much again for joining us. Apologies for the glitch earlier on. But just in considering what Advocate Cronje has just said now about the investigation of powerful people and how, for instance, there is, of course, this question that will always come around political influence. Right now, Advocate Cronje wouldn't confirm who are those people who are being investigated, and it's totally understandable. But why is it important to investigate those people and prosecute?
Yes, certainly a prosecution service that is independent is one that is prepared to go after powerful people who can make life difficult for the prosecutor. What needs to happen in South Africa is for the National Executive Committee of the ANC's resolution that was taken at the beginning of August this year, calling upon Cabinet to establish a permanent, independent, specialist entity to deal with corruption. And they mean both the investigation and the prosecution in one unit. If you can do that with a body that is specialized, properly trained, able to act without fear, favor, or prejudice, resourced in a way that doesn't have anybody looking over their shoulders to see where the next tank of petrol is coming from, and secure in its tenure of office. So when you go after somebody powerful, you don't lose your job for doing so, as happened to General Dramat, for example, who was suspended when he asked for the Nkandla dockets. So if you can get that type of organization that the Cabinet has been asked to establish, we will have the investigative directorate on steroids, and we will be able to deal with the question of grand corruption with impunity, which is really at the heart of the problem in relation to corruption in the country. We don't even have a definition of grand corruption. We don't have a rands and cents amount in law that is the cutoff point between ordinary corruption and grand corruption. That will need to happen when the NEC's resolution is implemented by Cabinet, when the legislation is passed. At the moment, investigations are the province of the Hawk, and the prosecutions are the province of the National Prosecuting Authority. What is envisaged, the two will come together, and they will not be on the different pages all over the show in hubs and in anti-corruption task teams and in fusion centers. They will be one unit that has the capability, the capacity, and the skill to see off the corrupt.
Okay, Prof. Ntlhajana, let's hear your take on that.
Well, it's important to deal with powerful people. because you need to establish the rule of law. The whole idea of a democratic state is that the law applies equally across, regardless of who you are, right? And so to promote respect and observance with the law is that everybody must be seen to comply and must be subject to the law. So whoever might be watching would not have an excuse to say, well, I will not abide by this law because certain people are exempted, right? So that's how you cement the idea of equality. It's not an abstract principle.
Yeah.
To infuse it into our public consciousness, these are practices that must be seen to be happening all the time, because we have heard a problem of impunity in this country. People acting with disdain for the law, thinking that they will not be touched by the law. And so you have then creeping lawlessness, right? Because people see that other big guys, the strong men, are not prosecuted.
Yeah.
So it then means that the institutions of state are not intact, because they are not respected. So there is nothing that guides collective action, because people think that certain rules apply selectively. So to promote collective action, a common purpose, obedience for public institutions, you need to have the law applying equally across the board.
Okay, Advocate Cronje, just your take on that as we conclude, and also mentioning the case against the former SABC Commissioner, Khomotso Phahlane, if those are what we should be considering as the powerful people.
Police commissioners are not only powerful, but we entrust them with very important responsibilities. And so it's particularly egregious when you have law enforcement breaking the law. And so certainly I feel very strongly, and certainly those of us in the directorate feel that it is a priority for us to clean up law enforcement, whether it's the NPA, the SAPS, the State Security Agency, because if we have confidence in law enforcement, and if law enforcement is doing their jobs, then all the things Professor Ntletiana was referring to, respect for the law and equality will prevail. So yeah, I certainly agree that we should prioritize that the powerful should be held accountable.
Yep.
But I also appreciate that it's no easy task.
Well, certainly, and we'll be watching closely the work that you're doing, and hopefully many months from now we'll have a successful prosecution. Thank you so much, Advocate Cronje there. Also thanks to Advocate Paul Hoffman as well as Professor Ntletiana. We've come to the end of this evening's show. Thank you so much for watching Unfiltered with me, Aldrin St. Pierre. It is goodbye from me as well as the rest of the team.